chances are that most, if not almost all of you listening to this are already an incorporated 501c3 nonprofit organization. You probably already have a board of directors in place. You're clear about your mission and your values, and you have indeed started up your programs or your services. All you need now is money. All you need now is funding, and everything will be just fine. But if I could ask you for a minute to leave your nonprofit organization behind and put on the hat of a funder, perhaps a staff of a foundation or a board member of a foundation that gets many requests for grants, many opportunities to fund nonprofit organizations. As a staff person or as a board member, what are you going to look for in terms of how you decide which organizations to fund? Are you going to look at who's on the board of directors? Are you going to look at who the executive director is? Or are you going to look at the staff, the impact that the program is going to have, the cost of the program? All of these are questions that we know that funders may ask. There is then a very big kind of gap between asking for funds and being ultimately accountable. More specifically now, I'd like to ask you whether you as a nonprofit organization, as you're seeking these funds, have thought through these points. One, why do you want to fund this project, this particular project, and why do you want to fund it at this particular time? Have you looked at what all the income and expenses will be, including staff time and sometimes sort of hidden or soft cost? Do you know for sure that you want to fund this program with charitable or donated dollars? What about a fee? Can you charge a fee? What about the possibility of government funds? What about the possibility of other type of funds or resources in addition to charitable dollars? Where do you want the money to come from? Also, who needs to be involved? Who's providing the service? Who are the people that will be help promoting the program, and so forth? How do you show ultimately that you're going to be a good steward for the funds that an individual, a foundation, or a corporation is going to give to you for this program? And a big, big point, a bottom line, is once the funding that you acquire for this program has ended, does this project have a future? Are you only going to have this project as long as you have this funding? If the project proves successful, where are you going to look for additional funding? There are a variety of approaches to starting programs in startup organizations, and they essentially have been summarized very nicely by Authenticity Consulting into 5 categories. And I'd like to just mention those 5 and go through each one. And as I do, I would like you to think about your organization, where you fit, maybe where you fit currently, where you've come from, where you need to go. They are, number 1, build it and they will come. 2, seat of the pants. 3, incremental planning. 4, business planning. And 5, business development. Let's look at the first one of these, build it and they will come. This is where a nonprofit organization is generally brought into existence by the passion and drive of a founder, somebody who wants to make a difference. I often think of performing arts or arts groups in this regard, somebody who has a passion for a particular art and wants to start a gallery, a theater troupe, or whatever, and they just want to will it that it will come into existence. And it doesn't have to just be a theater group. It could be a human service organization trying to address a need in the community. The passion is so focused on the founder that it's often the founder who is the driving force to really kind of make this happen or not happen. And as the founder and maybe some of the early supporters go out to approach folks and ask for funds, try to establish support, they can be very frustrated. The founder, the supporters can become very frustrated if they feel that the folks there are requesting these funds from do not readily acknowledge what a wonderful program this is and do not readily come forth with money. In fact, at times it can kind of lead to an anger and even to a frustration to the point where the founder or the early supporters will say, my gosh, we know we had something here that was really good, but if other people don't want to support it, well, the heck with them, and they're going to be at a loss, and we're just going to have to let this organization go. There's a real decision that comes as to whether the founders, the people who are involved, decide to bail out, or they decide to take the information they're hearing, mature, and move on to the next level. Let's look at a second alternative here, which is seat of the pants. This is where the organization has indeed come into existence. It's driven by providing the service. Let's think of a homeless shelter where folks have seen the number of homeless people around, particularly the challenges that they face in colder or winter months, and they want to respond. They're driven, the organization here is driven by the need, the desire to provide the services. And so their focus is really on the activity of getting these services up and running. They think about funding almost secondarily. Once the services are up, then they go, how are we going to fund these? And they go in a flurry of looking for resources from any and all sources. In fact, they're not editing very much who they go to. They'll go to anybody. And sometimes the people who will give them the funding or the resources will ask that they do different things, which may not be precisely in line with what they originally thought as programs or services. In the seat of the pants approach, the focus is on just trying to keep the organization alive, getting funds from wherever, making it from one day to the next. The third of our models that we want to look at is called incremental planning. This is where the nonprofit organization has done a pretty good assessment of what the client needs are. So not only do they want to provide a service, but they really have looked at what service the client wants. And as a result, they've put together sort of a model or a program model that will respond to these needs. They want to, rather than roll out this entire program, seek lots and lots of money. They say, let's start this as a pilot. We surveyed the needs. We've adjusted our program accordingly. Let's now provide the service, the program, see how folks are responding to it. And as a result of phasing or starting it incrementally, they also will not need as much funds up front. In fact, as they attract those funds, show the program is successful, then indeed it puts them in a wonderful position to be able to go for additional funds. So perhaps the way to think about this stage is along the lines of the old Aesop fable that slow and steady win the race. Let's look at the fourth of our fifth model here, which is the business planning approach. This is where the folks now come and look at trying to solve a particular problem. Maybe it's a tougher problem in the community. I think of the example of maybe a suicide prevention line. We have a large number of colleges or universities, a large number of students in our community, and we're seeing increasing rate of suicide among them. What do we do? Well, in this approach, one of the first things you'll do under the community assessment is to really understand what that problem is. Is this only a problem among the students? Is this among a wider audience? That's what the community assessment approach is here. Once you've done the community assessment, then you look at how you're going to design and implement your programs and your management plan. And because you've put that thoughtfulness into it, it's kind of natural for you now to look at a marketing and a financial plan. A marketing plan meaning how do you get the word to the people who really need to use the services, and a financial plan for how you fund it. Let's look at the last of our five models here, which is the business development approach. This kind of takes the previous approach and goes more in a much more significant way. As I'm talking about these five approaches, I would like you to think of something else. And that is, I bet you each and every one of you at some point has thought about starting your own business. Now, I say business. I don't mean nonprofit. You thought about starting your own business, whether that's a car detailing, a jewelry store, a restaurant, something else. But you know that when you start that business, you're going to put your resources on the line. And how is it that you can be successful? We know that most small businesses, as much as 80%, fail within the first year or two of their operation because they don't have a detailed plan. So let's look at this last one maybe a little bit in that light. As a nonprofit now, I'm going back to our nonprofits. As a nonprofit, you want to respond to a need in the community. So one of the first things you're going to look at is, I could respond to that need in a number of different ways. If we have kids who are dropping out of school in the 10th grade and not finishing high school, what might be some approaches that we can have to go forward? And in fact, one of the things we have to look at, who is already trying to do things with those particular students that are dropping out. So you're analyzing your market and you're analyzing your environment. Are they dropping out because that new auto plant came and people feel like, gee, I can go get a good job and I don't particularly need that high school education? So in the process of looking at those alternative approaches, analyzing your market and your environment, you might actually identify some new needs. You may find that there's as much of a need not to just focus on, say, maybe 10th graders, but maybe to focus on young adults who have since not finished school but are working and need to be more literate, have a high school education or whatever. So in the process, you're also assessing what your organization can do. You know that your organization cannot be all things to all people, and you may only be able to focus on a niche of serving just a niche of this particular need. And so you choose that best approach, and in that process, you focus on the sustainability or the ability of this organization to be there for a while. So I hope I've done a halfway decent job of explaining those 5 approaches, and I would love for you now in this next polling slide to have true confessions, although it will be anonymous, of course, but true confessions as to where you feel your organization, the organization that you joined this webinar for, where might they fit given these options? Okay, great. Thank you for your responses. We're finding that probably about 2/3 of our folks feel that they are at the business planning or business development stage. And we do know that we have a good handful of folks joining us today who are just thinking about starting a nonprofit. So maybe it's natural that you might be more in those first 2 or 3 phases. What I'm going to do now is kind of take you through the steps in a business plan or the steps in trying to put together a program plan. And this would be a way for you to see, indeed, how prepared you are or what additional steps you might need to take. A business plan, by definition, is a thoughtful, systematic projection of the financial, marketing, personnel, and real cost and effort of a program that helps accomplish a nonprofit's mission. There are a lot of things in this brief definition. You've got to look at finances. You've got to look at the market. There's a sense for nonprofits not to see themselves as having to do that much of marketing because they're so convinced that the need they're going to come into existence to serve is so great that people will just flock to you. The personnel. And in nonprofits, this includes both staff and volunteers. And as I mentioned before, the real cost of what's involved. The fact that you might be able to get started in rental property with free rent doesn't necessarily mean that you're always going to be there. How do you approach that at a later point? Sometimes I think when we look at a business plan, I talked about this a little bit before, let's look at kind of these pieces, and then we're going to go more specifically into the components that you need to look at. But here's the benefit of taking the business plan approach, and that is it forces careful thinking. You don't just kind of run with your gut, so to speak. Not that there isn't a role for sort of your gut and your instinct, but you kind of keep it in check, if you would. It encourages discipline in terms of looking how you proceed, maybe how eager your goals can be. It forces internal communication. If you are maybe a little bit of a larger organization, maybe you already exist as a nonprofit. You already have a staff of 5, 10, 15, 20 people. It kind of forces everybody to be communicating and making sure that you're all on the same page. It enhances coordination and clarity of purpose. Is this new program going to fit into your mission? Is this new program going to fit into your strategic plan? Is everybody on board with this? Your managers, your staff, your volunteers, your donors. Another thing with programs that sometimes we overlook is we overlook the capital that may be needed to get a program going. Nonprofits don't have a ready pool of capital like businesses have. And you don't also have a ready ability to necessarily go to a bank or somebody else to get that capital. Nonprofits generally raise the capital as they need it, and sometimes there's a lag there. If you need a particular facility to put your new museum in or whatever, it may be 12, 18, 24 months before you actually have that new facility. What are you going to do in the meantime to pique interest, begin to put your exhibits out there, and so forth? The business plan also defines and measures programs. So you have strategies and benchmarks. If we're 6 months into our program and we're not hitting our benchmarks or we're not accomplishing some of our goals, what do we do? How do we adjust? It doesn't mean we necessarily need to terminate the program, but we need to look at it. A business plan also gives a competitive advantage. We often don't think as nonprofits that we're in competition with other nonprofits or other organizations, except when it comes to fundraising. It's amazing how folks always kind of feel that the glass is half empty when it comes to fundraising. But as a nonprofit, you have to understand that probably anything you're going to do, any mission that you have, there are probably going to be other organizations out there that are addressing that in one way, shape, or form. Where do you fit into that mix? Are you trying to provide the same services? If you're trying to provide a different service, what market is that to? How will they understand it? And so you really have to look at your uniqueness, and this goes back to assessing the strengths and weaknesses, your mission and your values. And of course, without a business plan, you may not be able to fund your program or your organization. We already know that more and more foundations particularly, and even some individual funders, when you come with a new program or a new idea, they're saying, let me see your business plan. Let me see your 2-year, 3-year, 5-year projections of how many people you're going to serve, what kind of income it's going to bring in, how you're going to fund it. And most importantly, what we want to talk about in a little bit as we move ahead is what difference is it really going to make. Most of your organizations probably already have, whether it's official or not, you already have a strategic plan. You've looked at organization-wide where your organization is, where they want to go. You've made some choices and priorities about the kind of services you want to provide, you don't want to provide. You've looked at what some of the risks are that you're willing to take if you're dealing with children or serving children in today's environment. And involving volunteers, even transporting them, there are issues that you need to look at. The strategic plan helps you look at how to maximize your mission, but it tends to be kind of flying at 35 or 30,000 feet. And so what the difference would be with the strategic plan and the business plan is the business plan gets much more into specifics. What is the process? What's the specific process by which you're going to accomplish your strategic plan, your mission, your values? Specifically, how are you going to use your resources, which come down to people, money, and your programs? And the business plan tends to be more than a pro forma. A pro forma usually is where you see your money coming in, your support coming in, how much you see your expenses. But you're looking at this particular business plan in the context of the total organization, not just isolated on this particular program or project. You know, what happens if in a nonprofit you're trying to get 2 or 3 programs started at the same time? Especially if you started your nonprofit, you have a passion to serve the need. You're not patient enough, say, to let's wait and see if this program works. You've got 2 or 3 going at the same time. How are we going to benchmark and know that those programs are working? When do we pull the plug on some and not for others? If we go back to our small business model, if we're a small business and we open up, it's pretty darn easy to see whether we're making it or not. We got customers, and are they coming in? Are they not? After 3 months, 6 months, we know that's there. Sometimes it's harder. Sometimes it's harder with a nonprofit to kind of know when we're not responding as much, because those of us who founded the nonprofit, who are on the board, have that passion to try to keep it in existence, that we may not always be getting that feedback or analyzing that feedback that we're getting from our folks. The other thing that I talked about a little bit before when I was waving my hand over you and saying that you all are going to be, if you would, foundation folks, is the outcomes. I'm seeing increasingly with today's funders, I'm seeing it especially with foundations, where, and I can think of one whose name I will not use, but I think of one specific foundation that has been in existence for 10 years. And what they've just done is actually called a 6-month hiatus from accepting proposals. And they actually hired an outside consulting firm, and they're looking at what grants they've made over the past 10 years, what difference it makes, and what kind of difference they want to make in the future. And we see even some foundations moving to more of an RFP, a request for proposal, saying, no, we're not just going to accept any proposals that you come and deliver to our door. We're going to tell you what we're going to fund, and we're also going to tell you the results that we would like to see, and then we're going to fund you on the basis of accomplishing that. I see another, I can think of another foundation in the health field that is kind of in a similar situation where they have, they were founded with the conversion, many of you know, of the hospitals that went from a not-for-profit to a for-profit status. And in that process, there were some foundations created in that sale. And this particular health foundation is saying the same thing as the foundation I mentioned before, and that is, what difference are we really making? We're giving out all of this money. Can we really say we're making a difference? I think that nonprofits in the future need to be more and more of a partner, especially with their institutional funding sources. Those would be foundations, corporations. You really need to know and understand what those funders want to get out of their investment. And maybe that's one way to look at it, is as more of an investment. Again, I think when we start our nonprofit, we usually start it with such zeal that we just feel if we can get out there, if we can be active, we can do so much. But at some point, there will come a day of reckoning, even with the founder, even with the board, to say, are we really making a difference? Are the funds we're attracting, the time we're giving, is it really making a difference? So that's part of the reason for the discipline, if you would, of the business plan. Let's look now at specifically what some of the components would be. When we took our poll earlier on, we saw that several of you felt your organization was already at a stage of doing some business planning. So this might serve as a nice audit for you to see if you do have these things in place. For those of you that were not that far along, this will give you kind of a roadmap. So as we prepare our business plan, we're looking at, number one, an executive or plan summary. Can you take your whole plan and put it down into 2 or 3 pages? Because you will get an opportunity to talk to some folks, but they're not going to want to see all of your document. They may say, send me a summary. Many foundations now have a 2-fold process where you send them a 1-page letter or a simple form, and then they decide based on that whether they invite you to submit a proposal. So there has to be a way that you can succinctly explain what your organization is doing or what this new program or plan is trying to accomplish. Number 2, what is the problem you're trying to overcome or the opportunity you're trying to serve? The question here becomes, what's the urgency of funding or starting this program at this time? Maybe the problem is you've got a severe problem with crime in a particular neighborhood, and you're trying to bring together a neighborhood watch program or something like that to respond to it. On the other hand, when we think of opportunity, we think sometimes more of maybe like the arts. We have an opportunity to start a dance troupe because we have no dance theaters or anything like that in the community. And here's an opportunity. Our community is growing. They're appreciating the arts more and more. Here's an opportunity to bring dance to them. Maybe there's an opportunity in the public school system, which has since done away with its art and music program, to actually create a nonprofit where you can bring some arts and music education into the school system. So I want to be clear here that when we say problem or opportunity, it's not something that is, so critical that it's life or death. It can be across a broad spectrum, but you've got to be able to articulate why you're doing this, why you want to fund this, why you want to start this program at this time. Also, people want to know about your nonprofit and your plan. Who is your nonprofit? How long have you been there? Who's on your board? They're looking for some credibility. The newer you are as a startup nonprofit, the more important it's going to be for folks to see that the people who are involved with you are people that are going to be good stewards, that are going to, so to speak, vouch for you. As you become more established, that is still important, but at that point you're going to rise and fall more on your actual programs and services that you're delivering. You need to have your management and leadership in place. Even if you're all startup, all volunteer nonprofit organization, who's going to be playing what role in overseeing programs, in looking at their outcomes? If you are staffed, how many staff do you have? Are you looking at new staff for this particular program? The other thing is the description of the market. We talked about this before. There's a tendency when nonprofits start up, especially sort of with a passion or a zeal, not even to think about who else is in the market, because they know that their passion, their answer is the right answer, and it's going to solve the problem that's out there. But I can't emphasize this enough, that you really need to try to find out what other organizations, nonprofits, are there out there like yours. What services are they providing? Have they been successful? Have they not been successful? It's fairly easy to start up a nonprofit organization in the United States, and we do get more and more nonprofits. One of the things you might want to look at is, can you collaborate or work with other nonprofits given the mission that you're trying to accomplish? In today's environment, what are the technical operations that are required? I can think of a nonprofit which is now very established here in Atlanta, has been here for 40 years, started as a consumer counseling organization, and at that point you literally had to come in and talk to a counselor. Later you could actually call the counselor on the phone. And now this organization has a nationwide presence because it can do the counseling over the internet, live with interaction, and it has a tremendous capability. The nonprofit you're trying to start up, how technical do you need to be? How technically do you need to be to compete with other nonprofits or to attract your customers, the folks that you want to serve? What is your marketing and promotions plan? If you build it, they will not necessarily come. And if you build it and in your business plan you project how many people need to come, how do you keep tracking that? How are you going to promote this? How are you going to stay in front of the public? Do you have to pay for that marketing and promotion? Can you get it done in kind? How do you get the word out? How do you get customers to come to your door? Let's continue with the components. The financial, of course, is a huge component of any business plan or any time you're trying to put together a program. What are your assumptions about the program you're trying to serve? And do you have some alternative scenarios, maybe if folks are not coming as quickly, or if they come more quickly? Is there a plan A, a plan B, a plan C? What are your income and expenses? And you have to be really honest with this. I can recall one situation here in Atlanta where a museum opened, or I'm sorry, a museum was in the process of doing a capital campaign. And in order to allay the fears of people they were asking to invest, they, of course, put together their business plan, which projected a certain number of visitors, income from rental, and so forth. As it turned out, that plan was extremely optimistic, and within the first year, they were badly failing at meeting that. So not only were they having to pay for the increased cost of this new facility, but they weren't even getting the projected income that they had, and now it was much more difficult to go back to those same funding sources and say, we know you just gave us a whole bunch of money, but we need some more money just to stay afloat. We didn't estimate this well. What about cash flow? Especially if you're looking at our health and human service folks that are looking at maybe starting something and being dependent on government funds. Maybe you're trying to do something with foster care children or whatever, and you know there's some RFPs out there from the government and you can get some funding. One of the things that's fairly notorious there is you may have to wait 60, 90, maybe even as many as 180 days before you see those dollars. What are you going to do in the meantime? How is cash flow going to impact this particular program, your nonprofit? We already talked before, are there any capital expenses that you'll need? Do you need new facilities, new equipment? Where's that money going to come from? And just overall on your balance sheet, looking at all of your assets and all of your liabilities and how you leverage those to be effective. Personnel is huge. And again, here we're talking in a nonprofit not just about paid staff, but we're also talking about volunteers. If you're looking at starting this program, and it's going to be heavily dependent on volunteers, do you have a track record with using volunteers? Do you know they're going to come through for you? If the volunteer doesn't show up to do the counseling, what do you do after you've bussed the child there for that session? And then in general, trends and risk. True risk here, risk meaning that you can be sued for certain things, insurance liability, all those kind of things you need, and any other supporting documents. And in the supporting documents, it's really good to look at how you might cooperate and collaborate with different folks in the community and look at those letters of support that say, yes, this is a startup organization, but as this particular organization down the street, I think these folks are really onto something. They've thought through this well. It's nice to have that kind of support. I've got, at this point, another polling question for you, and that is, when you see yourself starting this new program or this new project, what do you see as the biggest obstacle to preparing, being able to start this new program? Okay, this looks much more like a true confession than maybe before. I see two-thirds of you don't know exactly where to look for funders. Yet, I saw several of you in that first slide say that you were there with your business planning. If you're that far along on your business planning, you should already have a pretty good sense of where the money is, who the funders are, and what you need to do. And so it's not uncommon, I think, for most nonprofits to feel that if they just had money, if they just had the money, they could be effective. And I think the point I'm trying to make in this entire presentation today is your need to do your due diligence along several fronts, and not just feel like if you had the money, it would happen. It's not going to be easy to get that money, and when you get that money, you want to use it very effectively, very efficiently. The other thing I see down here is just a couple people saying being unclear on how to measure success. So I'm hoping that what that says is you've thought through your program or your project, and you have a pretty good idea of what you want the outcome to be, and you're going to be able to articulate that clearly, because if you are, that's going to help you with the funding. And so I so appreciate your weighing in here on these. I want to mention one other thing here, and this would fall into sort of some pitfalls, some things that I see where nonprofits get into trouble. And then after that, I think we'll be ready to take your questions. When I look at the nonprofits that I've worked with over the years, when I've seen the startups, the ones that have existed for a long time, that are just starting up, let me just kind of reflect on some things here. Number one is, I think that when we seek funding, there's something of the excitement of the hunt in this. And that is that we approach it as we really want to get this grant. We hear there's some funding out here. Let's go get this. But anytime you look, especially in today's environment, for funds, you have to understand that those are not coming with no strings attached. They're coming because the funder wants to make some type of difference, wants to see some type of change. And you need to know what that is, because ultimately you're going to have to be accountable to that funder, especially if you do what most nonprofits do. We want to go back to those same funders over and over again. If you give me some money, I'm going to want to come back to you as the same source over and over again. So be careful that you're not just looking at getting money, trying to balance the budget, but you're really looking at how that program can be sustainable over time. The other big one is overly optimistic about the response from the market. And this can be anywhere from being overly optimistic about the number of kids that are going to come to your after-school program, the number of people who will actually fill seats to see a dance repertoire, or the number of people that might come to your museum. What I say, and I know this may be a little bit harsh, but whatever you come up with as your projections for your program or your plan, cut it in half. Cut it in half and ask yourself whether you can make it with half of that response. And then go ahead and create another scenario that says, could we do it with 3/4? Could we do it with all? But create some alternate scenarios there that allow you for some contingency plans if all that money doesn't come in. Remember, you're going out to sell this to other folks, and you're telling them, if you give us the money, we're going to make this happen. If it doesn't happen, that doesn't bode well for you in the future. The other thing is the incomplete financial analysis. This is the true assessment of the real expenses, the real income, and any capital needs. Wrong people for the job. Do you have the right people? So you're going to start a dance troupe, and you're going to start it in a small Midwestern community, and you're going to do creative and avant-garde dance. May not be the best market. You may have a very small niche here unless you're on a campus or something else. So do you know that you have the right people to deliver the right program? And then lastly, something we've talked about before, and that's the whole issue of no plan to sustain. I see more and more and more, especially of the foundation, saying, show me not only what the outcomes are going to be of this program, but show me that if it's successful, how you're going to fund it, because you're not going to be able to come back here to us, the same foundation, and get this money over and over again. So who's going to fund it? You've been very, very, very kind in listening to me over this past 40 minutes or so, and I hope during this time I've generated some thinking for you, and perhaps, I'm sure, some questions. So I'm going to turn this back over to Asia to see if we can respond to some questions in the time we have remaining.
Thank you, Mr. O'Kane. At this time, I'll read questions posed through our Ask a Question feature. Once questions have been answered, you'll have an opportunity to ask questions directly. Our first question: do foundations like to see strategic plans or business plans, or both?
Well, I think that in the past, I can remember going back, because I've been around for a few years, I can remember back in the 80s, certainly, when strategic plans were quite the thing, and going into the 90s, where foundations were saying, not only do we want to see your board list, and not only do we want to see your budget, but we also want to see your strategic plan. That forced a lot of nonprofits to get a strategic plan, to have a strategic plan. I think we're seeing that same thing happen now, particularly in this decade, where people are saying, I don't just want to see your strategic plan, I want to see your business plan, or at minimum, at least your pro forma for this program. Where's the income going to come from? What are the expenses? How do you see yourself sustaining this? And this is not just with Arts Group. I think this is across the board, even with things like Health and Human Service and other type of programs.
Okay. Another question. Can you please talk a bit more about return on investment?
I think that we're seeing more and more funders wanting to know if they're willing to give a gift to organization, if they're willing to make some type of contribution, what is the investment going to be on that? I can think of a situation that I've had recently with a client where a donor kind of did some of his own math and said, I know that you want to start up these programs, but I'm not so sure you've thought through them so that they're actually going to return the investment you think. Would you be better off if I just took $1 million and put it in an annuity for you and you simply had the annual earnings off of that? And in this particular case, the answer was we wouldn't be better off with that second approach, because part of the programs and services that we were trying to provide were essential to having the people who are involved in this community working and providing things. So when we say return on investment, if I'm willing to give $100,000 to this particular program, can you show me that in the future you are going to be able not only to provide that, but to leverage kind of the investment that's there? That's where people are looking at kind of the sustainability. I think investment and sustainability kind of go hand in hand.
Great, thank you. Another question came in about having resources that may show examples of sample foundation business plans, cash flow analyses, balance sheets, and income statement projections. And actually, we do have a resource on our resources slide from the U.S. Small Business Administration. I know that there's a plethora of information, including as it relates to nonprofits. So that is a wonderful resource for that.
And you also see the Business Plan Pro. That is a website. There are some costs for those programs. I think they're somewhat modest and can be more expensive, but the Business Plan Pro and the U.S. Small Business Administration will give you some models, some templates. And for the person who asked the question about the investment, I would recommend Tom Ralzer's new book, Return on Investment for Nonprofits, The New Key in Sustainability, and that is listed there in your resources.
Okay. Another question, I'm interested in a for-profit, nonprofit hybrid model to sustain my nonprofit so that I won't have to spend 90% of my time fundraising. How realistic is this idea?
Okay. I mean, you're saying you don't want to spend 90% of your time fundraising, but you may have to spend 90% of your time on your for-profit generating the money. So it goes back to your business plan as to how that for-profit piece will actually generate the income, and look at that. I think there was we were very enamored with some of these sort of corporate type of approaches. And I think what a lot of the literature has shown more recently is that when you really look at everything, they perhaps didn't generate as much income. So it's not bad at all. The first thing I would ask you to do with your nonprofit is don't think of providing all those services for free. Think about what fees your market will bear and what you can charge. If you're a dance theater, don't think like you can only charge 25% of the ticket. You may have to charge 60% or 70% of what it actually cost in order to make it go, because your ability to attract other resources will be limited. So first of all, for this answer, look inside your nonprofit to see what kind of fees and income you can generate. Second of all, if you are looking at a for-profit venture, be very clear on how much time and energy and effort it takes and what that might take away from you accomplishing your mission with your not-for-profit.
Now to our last question. We are a nonprofit planning organization. We are a nonprofit planning to provide medical services for free to sustain our overall vision. The medical services are indirectly related to our overall mission. How does an income-generating project fit into our grant seeking? We want to seek grants to build the medical center that will then provide ongoing funds for the nonprofit. Any thoughts on this approach?
Well, the first thing I would say is, are you sure that you want to provide those medical services absolutely free? Because I think there's something to be said about the value that people have, and even the integrity that you have in providing service is if someone feels that they can pay for something, even if it's a very modest $1, $5, or whatever. So I would go back and say, is there any income generation capability from that health service you want to provide? Secondly, I think that when you go to funders, the funders are going to look at why are you providing this service as a for-profit? Why can't you cover this entirely yourself? And what specifically is it that you need grants or charitable dollars for? And in that case, what you might want to do is segment some programs that you're looking for grants and programs. Maybe, for instance, it's like a diabetes education is what you want grants for because there is such a great need in your community, and you can't penetrate that need by just doing it for free. So again, what I would say there is if you are looking at looking for some grants or something there, I would look at how you might tie it into a very specific high-need type of program.
Great. Well, thank you all for participating in today's webinar.
I can't thank you all enough for participating. I hope it was helpful, and I wish you all well.